Welcome back to Burned Bridges Club. My father raised his champagne glass and smiled at 60 people, and in that moment, I understood something I had been refusing to understand for 32 years. To our Vanessa, he said, his voice carrying that easy southern warmth he saved for company. Who found the right man, built the right life, and made her mother and me prouder than we know how to say. Applause rolled through the room. Genuine, warm, beautiful applause. My sister Vanessa sat across the rehearsal dinner table looking radiant, her future husband Warren's hand covering hers. My father cleared his throat. He turned slightly in my direction. And to our Naomi, who serves the country. We're not entirely sure what she does exactly. Something with the government. A beat of polite laughter moved through the room. Very important, we're told. He sat down, raised his glass. Done. I did not move. I kept my hands flat on the white tablecloth and breathed through it the way you learn to breathe through things after 24 years in the Navy, steadily, quietly, without showing the cost. 3 seats to my left, a man named Fletcher Cross did not laugh. He set his water glass down and looked at me with the kind of expression I'd seen in 100 operational briefings, the face of someone cataloging everything. I want to tell you what was coming, not to spoil it, but because you deserve to know before we begin that what felt like the worst evening of my life was about to become the most clarifying one. 41 minutes after my father sat down, 187 men would rise from their seats in that same ballroom. Not scattered, not gradual, all at once, with the kind of disciplined, unified movement that civilians almost never witness outside of formal ceremonies. The marble floor would shake with it. Every conversation in the room would die. And my father, the man who had just described 32 years of my service as something with the government, would stand at the head table and not be able to find a single word. But first, you need to know who I am and who I was before the Navy made me. Before I go any further, if you've ever sat at a family table and been summarized in one dismissive sentence that had nothing to do with who you actually are, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. Now. Let me tell you who Naomi Holt really is. My name is Naomi Holt. I'm 52 years old. Until last year, I wore the uniform of the United States Navy for 24 years. I was not a clerk, not a secretary, not something with the government. I was a Special Operations Intelligence Coordinator. My job was to build the intelligence packages that went into the hands of SEAL teams and Special Forces units before they moved into the most dangerous places on Earth. I decided which routes were survivable and which were not. I analyzed adversary patterns down to the behavioral level. I built the frameworks that let trained men move through hostile territory and come home. When they didn't come home, I wrote the letters to their families. Every single one. By hand. I grew up in Macon, Georgia, third house from the end of a street lined with pecan trees that dropped their casings on the sidewalk every October. My father, Raymond Holt, was a regional sales manager for a building supply company, a position he held for 31 years with the quiet, steady dedication of a man who knows exactly who he is and expects the same from everyone around him. My mother, Virginia, was a school librarian who baked peach cobbler on Sundays and organized the church choir's schedule with military precision, though she would never have appreciated that comparison. My sister Vanessa came 7 years after me. I was 7 when she was born, which means I spent my childhood developing the specific patience that only older daughters know, the patience of watching a room reorganize itself around someone newer and softer and easier to celebrate. Vanessa was all of those things, genuinely, effortlessly so. She married at 24, had 2 children by 28, decorated a beautiful home, ran the school's fundraising committee, and made my parents proud in every way their world knew how to register pride. I married once, too. His name was Daniel. He was kind, patient, and eventually honest enough to tell me, not cruelly, but with the tired sadness of a man who had waited too long, that he had needed a wife and gotten a mission. I can't say he was entirely wrong. We divorced 12 years ago. I have no children, which is a grief I carry quietly and don't discuss unless I choose to. I live in a townhouse in Virginia Beach, 8 minutes from the ocean, with a garden I tend on the weeks I'm home, and a row of framed commendations I keep in my office, not my living room, because pride and display are two separate things. I haven't often been invited to display mine. Not at home. The first time my father made clear what he thought of my ambitions, I was 17 years old. It was March. Dinner was almost finished, chicken and rice, the table still warm with the smell of it. When I laid the materials I'd requested from the Naval Academy admissions office on the tablecloth and told my parents I wanted to apply, my father set his fork down, deliberately. He looked at the papers for a long moment. Then he pushed his chair back from the table and walked outside without a word. My mother watched the back door close behind him. "He'll come around, sweetheart," she said softly. He came back 40 minutes later, when the dishes were done and Vanessa was in bed. He sat at the kitchen table, folded his hands, and said, "Women in the Navy end up alone, Naomi." I was 17. I didn't know yet if he was right. I know now he was wrong about almost everything except the loneliness. And even that, he misunderstood. The loneliness of service is not the same as the loneliness of failure. One means you chose something. The other means something was taken from you. I applied anyway. He didn't see me off when I left for Annapolis. He shook my hand at the door, formal, strange, and said, "Write your mother." That was all. I wrote her every week for 4 years. 11 years later, I was 28. The year was 2001, and I had been working in special operations intelligence long enough to understand the weight of what I did every day. My team had built the intelligence package for an extraction operation that brought 4 American hostages out of a situation that had looked, until 72 hours prior, like it was going to end one way only. The operation worked. All 4 came home. 2 of my analysts had worked consecutive 40-hour shifts. I had not slept in 31 hours by the time we got confirmation. That evening, still in the same clothes, I called home. My father answered. "Dad," I said carefully, "I can't give you details, but I need you to know we had a very good day. Some people are coming home who might not have." There was a pause. "That's wonderful," he said. "Oh, your sister had her baby today. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. They're calling her Madison." I had not known Vanessa was in labor. No one had called me. "That's wonderful," I said, borrowing his words back. I stayed on for a few more minutes, asking about the baby, hearing about Vanessa's hospital room. When I hung up, I sat in my office with the lights low and the building almost empty around me and let myself feel the thing I almost never allowed, the specific ache of being competent somewhere no one in your family could see. The third moment was subtler, and in some ways, harder to carry. Because of that, I was 38. The Navy had just selected me for promotion to captain, 06, the most senior non-admiral officer rank, requiring a combination of operational record, sustained excellence, and the recommendation of a selection board that takes fewer than 1 in 8 eligible candidates. I called home on a Thursday evening. "Captain," my father repeated when I told him. "Captain of what? A ship?" I explained the rank structure. He listened politely. "Well," he said after a moment, "you were always better at studying than Vanessa." That was it. No congratulations, no astonishment. Just a comparison that reduced the most demanding selection process of my career to a matter of academic aptitude. I thanked him. I told him I loved him. I hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a full minute before I turned the kettle on. By the time Vanessa's wedding arrived, I had absorbed 32 years of this. I want to be honest. It had not gotten easier. I think there is a lie told about people who endure quiet dismissal for long enough, that eventually it stops mattering. It doesn't stop mattering. You simply get better at carrying it without letting it show. The rehearsal dinner was held at a historic venue along Savannah's riverfront. Iron chandeliers, long tables in ivory linen, warm Georgia evening light coming through tall arched windows. 60 guests. Vanessa in a dinner dress that caught every compliment in the room. Warren beside her already looking like a man who understood exactly how lucky he was. My father's toast came near the end of the meal. He spoke about Vanessa first. He spoke for 4 full minutes. He talked about the day she was born, the look on her face at her first birthday, the afternoon she'd called to tell them about Warren. His voice went rough near the end, the way voices do when love is finally permitted to surface through all the years it spent submerged. Then he turned slightly and lifted his glass in my general direction. And our Naomi, who serves the country? We're not entirely sure what she does exactly. Something with the government. He smiled warmly at the table. Very important, we're told. Polite laughter. Someone near the end of the table said, "Well done, Naomi." Clapping. My father sat down. I smiled. I raised my glass. I breathed. 3 seats to my left, Fletcher Cross set his water glass down carefully and did not smile at all. The rehearsal dinner ended around 9:30. I stayed through dessert, thanked the caterers, hugged Vanessa at the door, and walked out onto the cobblestone street alone. Savannah's air was warm and heavy with jasmine. Spanish moss hung motionless in the lamplight. I had walked a full block before I heard footsteps behind me. "Captain Holt." I turned. Fletcher Cross moved unhurriedly, a tall man with gray at his temples and the easy, controlled posture of someone who has spent decades making stillness look deliberate. He was Warren's godfather. I learned that at the welcome dinner 2 nights prior. And a retired SEAL Master Chief with 28 years of service, now working in defense contracting. We stood on the sidewalk outside the venue. "How long has that been going on?" he asked. "My whole life," I said. He nodded like that was the answer he expected. "Does he know what you actually did?" I looked down at the old cobblestones. "He knows I served. He chose his version of what that means." Fletcher was quiet for a moment. Then his voice dropped. "I was at Kandahar, September 2009, Operation Silver Hawk." I went very still. Operation Silver Hawk was a joint SEAL extraction that had collapsed in its first 12 hours. An ambush cut the primary team off from their route. A secondary unit took casualties. Command was, for approximately 90 minutes, in the condition they don't put in the official reports: lost. I had been running the intelligence package for that operation from a forward position at Bagram. When the ambush hit, I rebuilt the entire route framework from scratch, sourcing real-time imagery, running adversary position analysis, coordinating air assets in a window so narrow we measured it in minutes, not hours. 43 men came home that night. It had been the longest 14 hours of my career. "I know that operation," I said carefully. "I know you know it. I found out 3 years ago when a version of the mission report was declassified. I saw the name of the intelligence coordinator." He looked at me evenly. "I've been trying to find a way to say thank you for 3 years." I looked away, toward the river somewhere past the buildings. "You don't need to thank me," I said. "It was the job." "The job," he repeated quietly, "is what your father described tonight as something with the government." That landed the way true things land. Fletcher reached into his jacket pocket and took out a folded piece of paper. He held it without offering it yet. "Tomorrow," he said, "there are men in that ballroom who were at Silver Hawk. Some were at other operations you ran. All of them served in places where your work was the difference between coming home and not." He paused. "Wear your dress whites, Captain." Fletcher. "Not for your father. For those men. They have earned the right to stand for someone worth standing for." I stared at the lamplight caught in the Spanish moss overhead for a long moment. "I'll think about it," I said. He handed me the paper. I unfolded it. A list of 43 names. Beside each name, a 2-word notation: Silver Hawk, or another operation, or simply Home. I folded it and put it in my clutch. We said goodnight. He walked back toward the venue. I walked toward my hotel alone. I did not sleep much that night. At midnight, my dress whites hung from the closet door in their garment bag, zipped, dark, waiting. I sat at the hotel room desk with the list of 43 names and a glass of water I hadn't touched. The city outside was quiet, just the sound of a riverboat somewhere on the Savannah River, the low, distant hum of it moving through old glass. I thought about the civilian dress I had packed. Navy blue. Simple. Invisible. I thought about how much easier the day would be without the uniform. No reactions from guests who couldn't read rank insignia, no stiffness from my father, no performing for strangers who didn't know what to do with me. I thought about my father's toast. Very important, we're told. I set the list down. I picked up my phone. Fletcher's last text had come in at 10:47 p.m. 43 men. Tomorrow. Wear it. I put the phone down. I crossed the room. I unzipped the garment bag. The dress whites of a United States Navy captain are not flashy. They are precise. The fabric is dense in a way that changes how you hold yourself when you're in it, pulls your shoulders back, fixes your posture into something you can only sustain if you mean it. 4 gold stripes on each sleeve for my rank. The service ribbons across the chest. Each one a compressed history of a year I'd spent somewhere my family couldn't name. Gold buttons polished to the point where you can see your own expression in them, if you look. I ran my thumb across the 4th stripe on the left sleeve. Then I hung the bag back on the closet door, turned off the light, and lay down. I was up before 5. Old habit and unbreakable. I dressed in civilian clothes and walked down to the riverfront while Savannah was still mostly gray. The cobblestones were cool underfoot. A cargo barge moved steady and slow on the water, heading south. The moss in the trees above the river walk hung silver in the earliest light. I walked for 40 minutes and thought about names. Not abstract names, the real ones. Petty Officer Marcus Chen. Killed in action in Helmand Province in 2011. I had written his family's notification letter. Then I had called his wife at 7 in the morning, and we'd talked for 2 hours. She never learned what the operation was for. She didn't need to. What she needed was someone to tell her that he had mattered, that his death had mattered, that she was not going to be forgotten. That was the only thing I could give her. I gave it. Senior Chief Davis Wells, who walked out of Mosul in 2017 because I had insisted, and the 2 colleagues who thought I was being overcautious, on a last-minute route change after new imagery flagged movement on the primary approach. Davis had sent me a Christmas card every year since, unsigned, just his initials, D.W., in the bottom corner. 43 men from Kandahar. 211 men across 24 years of operations. I had carried all of them, in the way that people carry things that cannot be set down. Nausa nobasna emauzena desadazai. Spurdi anauzemarin. But as a responsibility, a weight you choose because the alternative is worse. I turned back toward the hotel when the lights started going gold. By 8 in the morning, I was dressed. The dress whites took me exactly 22 minutes to get right. That number is specific because I counted, because old habits from inspection mornings die hard even when there is no one to inspect for. Gold buttons, service ribbons in their correct order, the 4 sleeve stripes, immaculate. I pinned each piece carefully, not quickly, not impatiently. With the deliberateness of someone who understands that what you wear is not vanity. It is testimony. I looked at my reflection in the hotel mirror for a long moment. Then I picked up the list of 43 names, folded it twice, and put it in my jacket pocket. I arrived at the wedding venue an hour before the ceremony. The Savannah heat was already building, salt and magnolia in the thick air. White chairs lined a garden overlooking the river. Roses and greenery woven through iron archways. Guests arrived in small, laughing clusters. pastel dresses, men in summer suits, the particular ease of a Saturday in the South when weather cooperates. Fletcher was already there when I came through the gate. He took one look at the uniform, said nothing, just nodded once, the way you nod at something that simply is what it should be. Over the next hour before the ceremony, I watched him move quietly through the gathering crowd. He didn't announce anything. He spoke briefly to the military guests as he recognized them. A retired Master Chief near the Garden Arch, a former Navy lieutenant who had come as one of Warren's college friends, a Marine colonel near the fountain, a current duty Navy commander he had known for years. Brief conversations, a few words, then moving on. I watched those men's faces change, one by one, when he spoke to them. Not dramatically, just the subtle shift in posture, the slight straightening that happens when someone receives information that changes the weight of the room they're standing in. My father crossed the lawn when he saw me arrive. He shook my hand, that same formal, strange handshake from the morning I'd left for Annapolis, and said, "Glad you made it safely." My mother hugged me and told me I looked lovely and touched the ribbons on my chest briefly, lightly, the way you touch something you don't know how to read. The ceremony was beautiful. Vanessa walked down the aisle and I watched her face the moment she saw Warren waiting at the end of it. I thought, she built this. This is genuinely hers. The pride I felt in that moment was uncomplicated and clean. I sat in the back row and did not cry during the vows, though I came close, and not entirely for the reasons you'd expect. The reception began at 4 o'clock. I chose a table in the far corner of the ballroom. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, a jazz quartet setting up near the east windows, late afternoon light coming amber through the drapes. My deliberate invisibility, practiced and comfortable after years of choosing it. A young Navy lieutenant appeared at my table within the first 15 minutes. He introduced himself the way junior officers do when they're not certain their read-on rank is correct, carefully, with a small apology for the interruption built in. "My father served under your command structure in 2014, ma'am. He talks about the Helmand package. He says you rebuilt it yourself after the original analyst couldn't continue. What's your father's name?" "Lieutenant Commander Roy Hargrove, ma'am." I remembered him. Quiet man. Precise. "He earned his commendation," I said. "Tell him I said so." The lieutenant thanked me and stepped back. 2 minutes later, a retired SEAL chief I recognized from a 2011 joint operation came to say hello. Then a Navy commander whose name was on a citation I had written personally. Then a Marine major I had supported in 2015. The table filled with quiet, steady traffic. Not loud, not performative. Just the real, unhurried acknowledgement that happens between people who worked in the same difficult places without ever meeting face to face. Across the ballroom, I could feel my father watching. His expression had moved from the confident ease of a man hosting a celebration to something less certain. The look of someone whose understanding of a situation has begun to shift beneath him, and he isn't sure yet which way it is going. I did not look at him long. Then I saw Fletcher, on the far side of the room, approaching Commander James Whitfield. I watched Whitfield's face change. He turned to look at me. Then he turned to the man beside him, a retired Rear Admiral who had come as one of Warren's colleagues. The Rear Admiral looked across the ballroom, and then he stood. One chair scraped backward across marble, then another. If you want to know what happened when those chairs started moving, stay right here. Make sure you've hit subscribe, because what happened next in that ballroom is something I think about every day. Don't go anywhere. The sound hit before anything else did. Not voices, not applause. The violent, percussive scrape of chairs against marble, one after another, spreading outward through the ballroom in waves. Not random, disciplined. In the specific, unified rhythm that only exists when everyone in a room was trained to respond the same way to the same signal. A tide coming in. 187 people rising all at once. The jazz quartet stopped mid-note. A champagne glass froze halfway to a guest's mouth. A woman near the east windows said softly, "What's happening?" No one answered her. Commander James Whitfield stepped forward through the standing rows. He squared his shoulders. He looked directly at me across the length of the ballroom and said, in the voice that once carried across aircraft carrier flight decks without amplification, "Captain on deck." I rose from my chair. The room went absolutely still. I had heard that command hundreds of times. At sea. In briefings, in forward operating bases where the ceiling was canvas and the floor was packed dirt and rank meant the difference between a decision getting made and 17 people waiting without information. I had never heard it in a ballroom in Savannah, Georgia, at my sister's wedding reception, while my 76-year-old father stood 20 feet away at the head table with his champagne glass untouched and both hands flat against the white linen. 212 people in that room. 187 of them standing. Not one making a sound. I walked toward Whitfield. My heels on the marble. That was the only sound in the room. "Commander Whitfield," I said when I reached him. "Captain Holt." He held his salute. "It's been too long, ma'am." "It has." He stepped back. Behind him stood Fletcher Cross, and behind Fletcher, row after row of men. Some in dress uniform, most in suits, all carrying the particular bearing of people who don't need uniforms anymore to hold themselves like soldiers. Some I recognized immediately. Others I had to look at twice because years and gray hair and civilian life had changed the faces I'd last seen in harsher light. Every face carried the same expression, not performance, not deference, real recognition, the kind that comes from shared cost. A retired rear admiral named Thomas Aldridge stepped forward. He had served 3 decades before transitioning to defense consulting. He turned to face the room with the unhurried authority of a man accustomed to being the person others wait to hear. "For our civilian guests who may be uncertain what they're watching," he said, "I'll explain it briefly. The woman in dress whites is Captain Naomi Holt, United States Navy, retired. She spent 24 years building the intelligence frameworks that let SEAL teams and special operations units move through hostile territory and come home. She ran operational packages across 6 active combat theaters. She wrote personal letters to the families of every service member who died under her command." He paused. "She passed on promotion to flag officer on 3 separate occasions because she believed the field needed her more than a desk did. A number of the men in this room are alive because of decisions she made. I wanted you to know who has been sitting among you." The room stayed quiet. Some of the civilians had begun to understand. Others were still catching up. But the expression on every face, uncertain or comprehending, had become the same. The expression of people who have realized they are witnessing something they were not prepared for. A man with a cane moved forward through the standing rows. He walked slowly, with the careful economy of someone who has learned not to waste movement. Darnell Patterson, retired Navy corpsman, Operation Silver Hawk, Kandahar, September 2009. The last time I had seen his face, he was being loaded onto a medevac in the dark. He stopped directly in front of me. "You gave us more time, Captain," he said. His voice was completely steady. He wasn't performing for the room. He was delivering information that needed to be delivered. "You'd have found a way out regardless," I said. He shook his head once. "Not that night." I held his gaze and didn't argue. A woman I didn't recognize came forward from the civilian side of the room. Perhaps 35. Green dress. Composed in the specific way of someone who has already done their grieving somewhere, private. "My brother was Marcus Chen," she said. My throat tightened. "He wrote us, right before Helmand. He said his commander sent letters that sounded like she actually knew the men she wrote about. Not a form letter. A real one." She looked at the ribbons on my chest for a moment. "We still have it. We've read it so many times the creases have gone soft." I looked at her. "He deserved it," I said. "He deserved considerably more than a letter." She nodded once and stepped back. I looked across the ballroom. My father had not moved from the head table. His champagne glass was still on the linen. Both hands were flat against the table. He was watching all of it, every approach, every exchange, with an expression I had never seen on his face in my lifetime. Something past confusion, something rawer than that. The expression of a man who has been given information that is dismantling something he spent a long time building. And he has not yet decided what comes after the dismantling. My mother's hand was on his arm. She was watching me across the room with tears she was not letting fall. Philip Prescott, Warren's father, came from the side. A broad, silver-haired defense contractor with the ease of a man who has spent his life in rooms where consequential decisions get made. He extended his hand. "Captain Holt, I've known of you for years through the contracting world. I had no idea you were Vanessa's sister." "Neither did most people," I said. He smiled. Then he turned to the room. "I'll say one thing for our civilian guests," he said. "Most of what Captain Holt did during her career can't be discussed publicly. That's by design. It's the nature of the work. But the men and women here who served alongside operations she ran, they know. And I think the rest of you can see, from the way this room just moved, what that work meant." He left me to the room. People came in steady succession after that. Veterans, contractors, their families. An elderly woman touched my sleeve and whispered that her grandson had made it home from somewhere she couldn't name, and she had always believed someone was looking out for them. I thanked her and didn't ask for details. My father came to me near the end of it. He moved through the crowd carefully, the way people move when they are carrying something they didn't arrive with. He stopped in front of me and looked at the ribbons on my chest. Then he looked at my face. "Naomi," he said. "Just my name." I waited. "I didn't know," he said. "I know, Dad." He opened his mouth, closed it again. The confidence that had filled every room of my childhood, that easy, certain authority, was simply gone. In its place was something I had never seen him carry. The plain, unguarded face of a man who has run out of the particular version of himself he's been maintaining. I looked at him for a long moment. This man who had walked away from the dinner table when I was 17. Who had answered my biggest news with comparisons to my sister. Who had spent 32 years deciding in his comfortable certainty that what I did could be covered in 4 words. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't want to wound him. I only wanted to close something that had been open too long. "I didn't need you to understand what I did, Dad," I said quietly. "I needed you to believe I was worth understanding." The room around us was still, as he held very still. Behind him, Fletcher Cross stepped forward and placed one hand briefly on my father's shoulder. "Sir," Fletcher said, "your daughter brought 43 of my brothers home from Kandahar in 2009. Whatever else you may or may not have known. You raised someone extraordinary. I hope you're able to hold that now." Raymond Holt, 76 years old, a man who had spent decades being the most certain person in any room he entered, opened his mouth, and for the first time in my memory, he found nothing to say. The reception resumed. The jazz quartet found its footing again. Servers came back with wedding cake. Conversation started up, different in texture now, carrying new weight under the ordinary pleasantries. I stayed. I had planned to leave early. I stayed until nearly midnight. I danced once, with Fletcher, near the end of the evening, a slow song the quartet played almost inaudibly, just the two of us on a mostly empty floor, while the night settled into something quieter. We didn't say much. Later, Vanessa found me on the terrace overlooking the river. She still had her veil on, listing slightly from a long night of dancing and emotion, her new husband inside with his family. She leaned on the iron railing beside me and looked at the dark water. "I didn't know," she said. "I know. I mean, I knew you were Navy. I knew you'd done well. But I didn't understand what that meant. What it actually meant." She turned to look at me. How did I not know? Because I didn't tell you, I said. And because you didn't ask. And because we both got comfortable with the version of me that fit easily into the family conversation. She was quiet. Was I part of it? She asked. The way they treated you. You were a child first, I said, and then you were busy living your own life. I don't hold it against you, Vanessa. I'm only saying it now because you asked. She leaned her head briefly against my shoulder. No more disappearing for months at a time, she said. I want to know you, the actual you. I'll try, I said. It was the honest answer. My father found me later, close to 11. He came without my mother, which meant it was his choice and his alone. He stood beside me at the garden's edge, where the lawn met an old stone wall, overlooking the Savannah River. The water moved below us, dark and slow, the city lights broken and scattered across its surface. He didn't speak for a full minute. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and placed something on the railing between us. A laminated card, small, worn at the edges, creased through the center as if it had been folded and unfolded many times over many years. I looked down at it. A photograph. Me, in dress whites, 22 years old. Naval Academy graduation, June 1994. Standing on the platform, shaking hands with a commander, looking just past the camera the way you do when you've been told where to look, but you can't quite believe where you are. I stared at it. You weren't at my graduation, I said. I was, he said quietly. I stood in the back. I didn't think I'd earned a front row seat. I turned the card over. On the back, in my father's careful block printing, June 14th, 1994. The proudest day of my life. The laminate was worn in the specific way that paper gets when it has lived in a wallet for 30 years. You carried this, I said. I carried it. I looked at him. Why didn't you ever? I stopped. I didn't know how to finish. He leaned his forearms on the railing and kept his eyes on the water. When I was 19, he said, I enlisted in the Navy. I went still, passed every written test, showed up for the physical ready to go. He paused. The doctor found an arrhythmia, irregular heartbeat. They sent me home the same day. He rubbed his hands together on the railing. I walked into my father's hardware store and never talked about it again. I stared at his profile in the lamplight. You never told me that, I said. No. A long breath. I spent the next 50 years building a wall between myself and anything that reminded me of what I couldn't be. Military service, uniforms, achievement that moved away from me instead of toward me. His jaw tightened, then loosened. And then, you became exactly what I'd wanted to become and couldn't. The river moved below us. Somewhere inside the ballroom, the band played something low and old. Every promotion, he said. Every piece of news. Every time you called home to tell me something I couldn't quite understand, I was proud. Every single time. He closed his eyes briefly. And I was ashamed of myself every single time. I didn't know how to carry both of those things at once. So I kept pushing the pride out of sight. I looked at the laminated card in my hand, 30 years in a wallet, taken out in private, folded back up. You could have told me, Dad, I said. Any of this, 20 years ago, 30. I know. I would have understood. I know that too, he said. I've known it for years. That's the part that's hardest to admit. A long silence. The Savannah River moved in the dark below us. Inside the ballroom, through the old glass, I could see Vanessa and Warren on the dance floor, the last dance of their wedding night. And I thought about how strange and ordinary it is that some of the most important conversations of a life happen outside, quietly, while something else is happening inside. I'm sorry, Naomi, my father said. Just that. I looked at the worn edges of the laminated photograph. 30 years of being carried. I believe you, I said. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. Or if we did, it was the kind you allow for one moment and then move past. We stood together at the garden railing and looked at the same dark water for a long time, his silence and mine, side by side, not empty anymore. 3 months later, the Naval Postgraduate School called to offer me a position on their civilian advisory board, reviewing the next generation of intelligence frameworks being built for a new era of operations. I called home that same evening. My father answered. He said, "Hold on a second." Then, "Virginia, pick up the other phone. I want you to hear this too." In 32 years, he had never said those words. I held on. I heard my mother's voice on the extension. And then I spent 20 minutes telling them something real about my life. And they listened, actually listened, the way people do when they have finally understood that a story is worth more than they've been paying for it. In the spring, I drove down to Macon for the first time in 4 years. My father's workshop is a small outbuilding behind the house, sawdust and linseed oil, an AM radio that picks up only country stations, 30 years of organized hardware on the pegboard walls. When I stepped inside, I stopped. 2 frames hung side by side on the wall above his workbench. The first was my Naval Academy graduation photograph, the one from the laminated card, enlarged now, the colors slightly faded but the image clear. The second was a commendation letter, signed by the Secretary of Defense, citing my intelligence work in Helmand Province. Raymond had found it through a public citation database. He had printed it, matted it, and framed it himself. I stood in the doorway for a moment. He came up behind me and looked at both frames. "Took me long enough," he said. "It did," I agreed. We let the morning come in through the workshop window and didn't say much more than that. I mentor now. Young women applying to service academies, some the daughters of veterans, some the first in their family to consider it, some the daughters of fathers who pushed back from dinner tables when they said what they wanted. I tell them the same thing each time. You will be asked, many times in your career, to make yourself smaller so the people around you can feel comfortable. You will sometimes be tempted to comply because you love them and because it is easier. Do not confuse smaller with kinder. Do not confuse quiet with weak. The work you do will speak for itself when the moment comes, but you have to be present to hear it. Show up as what you actually are. Some people carry their pride like a closed fist. They don't know how to open their hand without something falling out. My father was one of those people. He spent 30 years being proud of me in a language I couldn't hear. I spent 30 years speaking in a room I thought was empty. We were both wrong. Not everyone gets the chance to find that out. I am more grateful than I have words for that we did. If this story found you at the right moment, maybe at the end of a long day when you needed a reminder that the quiet ones carry more than people see, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been carried in someone's wallet in silence while they showed you something different in public? Have you ever been the one doing the carrying? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if stories about hidden strength, late discovered truth, and the slow, difficult work of being seen by the people who were supposed to see you first, if those stories belong in your week, subscribe to Burned Bridges Club. We'll be here. Thank you for listening.